for getting started? Super.
Yeah, sure.
Good morning, everyone. And now I'll include everyone, even those without videos. My name is Pernille. I'm representing DAPS. I would like to bid you very good morning to this event with Nick Johnson. We think we are quite fortunate to have today Nick Johnson with us. He will talk to us about executive loneliness, which I think is an ever relevant and important topic, but it's probably even more important these days where we have put COVID-19 on top of it with everything that entails. Nick has a lot of experience within the area, I assume, or at least he has a lot of insight. I guess that's a better word, in the sense that he is the managing director of the Executive Global Network here in Southeast Asia. So that's a large network where he gets in contact with thousands and thousands of executives, where they're sharing concerns, frustrations, insights, and I think that must be an amazingly rich source for exactly this topic. Nick will do an talk of 35 to 40 minutes. We will have questions as we go. If you can type your questions in the chat, then we'll fit them in wherever it suits Nick in the presentation. And in the end, we will also have time for some Q&A. I should also say that we are recording the session, so if you don't agree to that, you're of course free to leave the session. And I think that is pretty much it from our side. We're excited to see so many people, but I do think also that the topic is super interesting, both for, I guess, middle managers and also, of course, senior executives. So over to you, Nick. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to hear your impressive insights.
Thank you very much, Pernille, and thanks, DAPS, for inviting me this morning. Indeed, as you say right there, Pernille, it's an important topic. Just before we jump into executive loneliness, let me give you a bit of my background. So I'm actually one of your neighbors across the bridge from Sweden. I was born in South Sweden, Kalmar. I left Sweden for Australia in '98, where I studied and started my career, and then I have worked in multiple jobs since 2004 in Southeast Asia. I worked, for example, for Oriflame, a big Swedish cosmetic company, and later on as GM for International SOS, first in Vietnam and then Indonesia, which is the biggest market for that medical service company in Asia. So I have the corporate background. I built myself up. I was managing up to 1,400 staff, 72 hospitals and clinics in Indonesia. So that's my background, but all the time during these years being a corporate, I was also very active in the Chambers of Commerce. I was the vice chairman of Nordcham in Vietnam for 6 years, and I also been quite active in the Swedish Chamber of Commerce when I lived in Thailand, Bangkok for a few years. So I'm very pleased to be part of this business community with DAPS today and to share with you the topic on executive loneliness. So how did I come up with this topic, executive loneliness? Well, through EGN, I'm working with a lot of senior executives, and rightly, as Pernille said, we're looking at the challenges that they're facing, and we are trying to create a safe space where people are signing a non-disclosure agreement so that you open up and you share what is really going on. And the more honest the conversation got, the deeper we got, I realized that things are not really so well. There's a lot of people suffering. There's a lot of people that are holding these topics secret on their heart. So we decided to do an anonymous survey to just investigate how really is the state of the mental health, how are people feeling and so on. And we sent this out, and the result was quite shocking. I will share with you today the result from that survey, some of the insights, some of the key findings. I will also share a few of the case studies of people that I've spoken with, because at the end of the survey, people could tick a box if they wanted to discuss further, and you'd be amazed how many people actually wanted to speak further, how many who were pleased just to be asked to speak up, because this is something that they kept inside them. And we just started then 1 year ago this project basically, and it's received a lot of media exposure in Singapore and globally. Here is actually the biggest media exposure ever in Singapore, which was 4 full pages in the Business Times in February this year, and just last month here another full page in the Straits Times. And yes, it's leading with my picture, but it's not so much about me. I just put myself there to say, well, I share my story, what happened in my career and the challenges I've had, and I invited then others. Because if you open up first and you say your story, then others are also feeling quite comfortable to share theirs. So that is what we're going to talk about today. But before we jump into looking at the findings, the research, let me just share with you my story. Of course, I'm glad to be with you here today. In 2018, I crashed myself. I just today, looking back, I'm just glad to be alive. Sadly, during this time, there was a friend and colleague of mine who didn't make it through, who committed suicide. I will share with you today the differences, why I'm here still alive today, and try to look at what happened in his case and why didn't he manage to reach out? Why didn't he call for help and go to the extreme length of committing suicide? So with my project, that's my ultimate goal, to really raise awareness around the stigma around mental health and to prevent these sad cases from happening. Because if we keep things inside us, then you never know what can happen one day. But if we just speak up to someone, a colleague, a friend, a wife, a husband, then that person is most likely going to help you. So during these times, especially with COVID-19, people have been suffering more challenges than ever before. So indeed, this topic that I started to research already before COVID-19 is now more extreme than ever. So let me take you back to year 2008. I'm an expat living and working in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon. I've worked for the company for about 1 year, and I did quite okay. During these times, I had 2 different MDs. They promoted me. I worked up my way. I was the national sales director for Vietnam for the company, and I was in line basically to become the managing director for one country in Asia. I then had a third MD coming in the role, and let's say that we had a bit of a clash. I wasn't probably mature enough to support him. Rather, I started to perhaps resent him, and having the team on my side and trying perhaps to talk around his back, and I think he could feel it, that I was not a very supportive staff. I wanted his job and he could smell it. So basically, one day I was called into his office and I was let go. Just when I come home that evening and I told this news to my ex-wife, she said, "Nick, the timing couldn't be worse, I'm pregnant." And at that time, I hadn't lived in Sweden for 10 years, and I was scared of moving back home, already an expat, comfortable living in Asia, but I didn't have much of a safety net. And it can be shocking when you lose a position, when you lose your job, you lose your income, when you're so far away from home, you have nothing to stand on. Many times your work permit is tied to the company, your house is provided by the company, everything. So basically you're on your own and you're very much perhaps left on the street. And here I am to become a father, and I was definitely not in a state and ready for that. And I also wanted to show that I can do this alone. I didn't want to tell my parents back home in Sweden what was going on. I didn't want to tell my family. I wanted to show that I'm fine. I will find a new job. But behind the scene, I was scared. I was alone. I didn't talk to anybody about what happened. So that was the first time when I really got serious anxiety. I had sleepless night about this. Luckily, after a few months, I got a new job, and also in Ho Chi Minh City, and I did quite okay in the job, so well that I stayed there for a few years. And when my son was 5 years old, I got a promotion to move as MD for a bigger branch of theirs in Indonesia. I'm still here now in a French fashion company, moved to Indonesia. So relocated over with my ex-wife and my son. And when we arrived in Jakarta, my son got into school there, and we moved into a house. And just 3 months after that, the company I worked for was sold, and I was let go again. So here I was again now in a new city with a company, and again I didn't really know what to do. I basically went home to my ex-wife and I said, I cannot cope with this. I cannot imagine now our son being out of school and so on again. I mean, what is happening here now to us? We're on the street again and I have to find a new job, and it's too much pressure for me to just cope with this. So I did basically in panic mode. I asked my ex-wife, please move back to Sweden with our son. At least then you can stay with your parents for a while. Our son can at least go to school, and just leave me here. Just leave me here in Jakarta. I will find a job. So that's what we did. And again, I tried to show that everything was fine on the outside, and I tried to control my life. I got into a lot of exercise, trying to do the best I could. And again, I found another job, and this time the job was with International SOS as GM for Indonesia. So I got back to a company that I had worked with earlier in Vietnam. It was a great position, great job. And I came in and I did well, but I was so anxious behind me. I was so scared that I was going to lose the job again. So we kept looking, well, should my son and ex-wife come back to Indonesia? And I said, no, let's just wait. Let me pass the probation. Let's see if a year goes. You never know if I lose this job again, if something happens. So I was just so insecure inside me. And I was always worried what people were saying around my back, what was going to happen. I was terrified when I received an email from my boss, because I thought maybe she's going to send me an email that I should come to the office and I'm going to be terminated again. So that was what's going on my mind, to the point where at the end of about 1.5 years in the job, I wrote my own resignation and I just resigned one day. Because in my mind, I thought it's better I resign than I'm being fired from a job again. When she received that email, she did call me into the office and she was absolutely shocked. She said, Nick, you are doing so well. We have all these opportunities for you. He said, what's wrong? Is it Indonesia? We can move you to Dubai. Do you want to roll in the US? What do you want? We don't want to lose you. We want to keep you in this company. But in my mind, I was already out of that. I just couldn't take it. And that's when I walked out of there, didn't leave on great terms because I was just mentally not ready for it. And that's basically when I crashed. And I went through very dark days by myself. Didn't really know what was going on, and I started to turn to alcohol, and that was my relaxation. Instead of exercise, I lost all my good habits, and things were not looking good for me. Luckily, I got a job with EGN at this time in 2016, and I helped them with setting up in Vietnam. And then in January 2018, they relocated me to Singapore. But I was still not really recovered. I was working on it, but I was still very anxious and worried, and I couldn't sleep well at night. So when I moved to Singapore, this is a picture of me. I had gained about 20-25 kilos. I have a smile on the photo, but that's after work, and it started to become a habit of me in order to relax after work. I worked hard. Well, I deserved to go for a drink, and that became almost every day that this had to become my pattern, and I fell into these bad habits, and this circle just continued, and I couldn't get back into healthy habits, and worse it got. And then in April 2018, this is a photo of my foot, really swollen. We did x-rays, everything, and because the doctors thought it must be broken. Well, it wasn't broken. It was only when I saw a psychologist and a therapist who said this is a psychosomatic disorder, an illness, which is basically related to mental illness, just showing that I had so much stress inside my body and so much anxiety that this occurred on my foot. And it was so big, the swollen foot, that I couldn't even put on a shoe. And I remember here in March, April 2018, lying in my bed and wondering what's happening to me. I remember my heart rushing so I could hardly breathe. And I just had no hope. I was not suicidal in the sense that I wanted to take my own life, but I certainly thought that life was over. I just couldn't see how could I get back on the right path again. So that was how the days for me. And I was starting then to reach out, trying to see to get some help and so on. At this time also, I wrote my will, I wrote my testament, because I basically thought that this is over. So at least my ex-wife, my son, they should be able to get the little money I have in assets. At least it shouldn't go to waste. So I cleaned all of these things up. And just when I think I hit the lowest point of my life suddenly just switched and it started to turn around. But then something happened. A colleague and friend of mine committed suicide. Simon was working in Singapore in the HR space, in the recruitment agency space, and just out of the blue, he committed suicide. He was supposed to speak on the topic of future of work at one of our EGN events, but he didn't show up even for the briefing. We were going to have a rehearsal, and he didn't show up for that one. And I was wondering what happened. And then I got a message saying that Simon had committed suicide. Came to a shock to me, to all of us. We had no idea that he had something going on inside him. He looked like a happy guy. He had just come back from Mount Everest, where he climbed up to the base camp, which was one of his dreams. He just fulfilled his dreams. He had a girlfriend that he really loved. He shared on Facebook that he'd never been happier, and he looked so happy on all the photos. So on the outside, everything just looked like a dream. Yet he was too quickly gone. I was so puzzled with this that I started to reach out to his family in the UK. I set up calls with his brother to try to figure out what happened here. And even his brother couldn't even understand it. They were quite close. So I said, what should we do here? Well, let's try to make sure that this case doesn't happen again. And so instead of knocking myself down and sitting at home getting depressed over it, I decided to take action. That's when I contacted SOS, which is the Samaritans here in Singapore. It's a suicide prevention agency, a charity. And I contacted them and I said, I want to help. So I set up the campaign, Race to an End of Executive Loneliness. And this was in August last year. And at this time, I was inside my own recovery. I had started to recover. I was back in training. I managed to eat well. And I will share with you later what was the switch, what happened to me, and how could I reach this stage. Because here on this photo, I'm in Sweden, August last year, to compete in an Ironman race, which is an extreme triathlon distance. So that's how far I turned my life around in just 1 year. But what got me there was really the push, the drive, and to go out, talk about this important topic. So loneliness is something that I suffered from, that I've seen people suffer from. And I know even during these COVID times now, even in my circles, there has been suicides, people that just cannot cope with the pressures that's going on. And it's not the pressures by itself. It is the fact that they don't speak to someone, that we are trying to hold on to the challenges and the difficulties inside us because we're just so scared that someone will judge you if you say to them what is going on. So on that note, I wanted to ask you, so what is loneliness? I have actually a poll here I'm going to launch. So let's look into the first poll of today. So what is loneliness? If you can, it's multiple choice, so you can pick as many as you like there. Just keep voting on the ones that resonate with you. What is loneliness? You can choose multiple choice. So yeah, the first one, an unpleasant emotional response to perceived isolation. Second one is anxious feeling about the lack of connection or communication with other beings. Can be felt even when surrounded by other people. It is not having lots of people in your life. Lacking high quality, meaningful, strong relationships. Lost the belongingness, which can be with a family or workplace, or all of the above. Okay, I think we have enough answers there. So yeah, you choose the correct one. It's all of the above, indeed. And especially in my case, I mean, with EGN here then in Singapore, I had so many people around me. I also had so many friends around me. But when I was with the audience, I still didn't feel the connection. And what I came to understand is that if you're not feeling well inside you, if you're not even connected with yourself, it's impossible to connect with other people, and it's impossible to connect with them if you don't speak up. It's about being vulnerable, being honest to yourself, and dare to just start speaking to one person, then to a second person. And as I will share later today, if you don't have someone in your life, there's beautiful doctors, therapists, psychologists, and everyone else out there that is willing to help. And I will also share with you later today how this really helped me. So now, what about then executive loneliness, the topic? So what is executive loneliness? Well, I was asked this on a radio interview in July last year, just before I went to start the campaign, when they asked me, what is loneliness? And I say, well, if we start at the top, it's certainly lonely at the top. And I think this may resonate with some of you who are regional directors in Asia or vice president Asia, where you're managing a region here, you're reporting perhaps to a boss in Denmark or in Europe or US. And you have a big responsibility on your shoulders. You have the P&L, you have country directors reporting to you from the various countries in Asia, and then you're reporting to the head office. So you don't really have someone at exactly your level inside the organization. And that is where the challenge comes in, because you don't have anyone really who you can speak to about your challenges, about your problems. So you're keeping it for yourself, because how can you open up to your boss who's calling you from overseas? Especially during the challenging times now, they are looking after the numbers. They want to see how much can we reduce the costs. So how are you going to change the business plan? The conversation very rarely go to how are you doing? And if it does, it becomes a pretty shallow conversation where you say, well, my kids couldn't go to school, or this happened or that happened. But is it really, really an honest conversation where you're sharing exactly the challenges you have? Not so often. It's very few who have those relationships, and especially that can have them remotely like that. So indeed, it is quite lonely at the top. But as I looked into this topic further, it's not only lonely at the top, and that's why I call it executive loneliness, because this is at every level of an organization as well, or your business owner can feel isolated if they don't have a few trusted peers, family, friends, some friends, or a professional network like DABS, where they actually discuss the challenges and they have some friends to open up to. So let's put this into context. So how many people in the world are suffering from depression? According to WHO, it's 300 million people. So that means that 5% of all people are suffering from depression. These numbers are at the moment going up because of COVID-19, and higher numbers there. But if we are then looking at in Singapore, the survey that I conducted, it shows that 30% of the people that we surveyed either are or have suffered from depression. That means that it's actually 6 times higher than the global average. And I was thinking, how can this be? Well, if you think about it, for a start, we talked about that most of them are in the regional positions. They don't sit in a head office where they have colleagues. They perhaps, many of them, as we know, are expats if you're in those positions. So that means they are away from the family. They don't have the parents or the relatives, the cousins, the sisters, the brothers around them. They don't have those people who typically would be the one who pick them up if they see that you're off the beam or you're not well or so on, and they would perhaps take you to a doctor. So that sort of explains why the numbers are so high, and also the work pressure. When we surveyed the members we also saw that they, even if they worked in the US or Europe or Asia, the pressure to work is higher in Asia, especially because of the cultural differences, the legal differences. It's just a very complex environment. And then comes the next point. So when we ask them, if you have a challenge or if you have a problem, would you talk to your company about it? And the sad thing here is that 75% of senior executives don't. I mean, even if they need help, they don't seek help due to the stigma. They just don't feel that they can talk to anybody. Perhaps even in Singapore, it's a small community. They're scared if I go and see a therapist, if I go and see a doctor, maybe someone see me in the waiting room. It's all this stigma around it. Or even if I go, to see someone at one of the clinics or wherever it is, they worried to be seen, and then a rumor spreads. So they find all these reasons, and it's really a huge stigma. They even worried, well, if it's shown on the credit card, then my wife will see it, or what about if my maid sees that I paid for this service? So it's just all these reasons for no one really take the next step. And even more, 82% of the executives won't even talk about it in the company. They will try to keep it by themselves. And this is where the whole challenge is, and this is where the problem is. So let me just quickly share with you a few executives who I've spoken with who will be featured in the book. So this is Jane. So she has a high-flying career. She's worked for some of the best accounting firms in Singapore. And just before COVID-19, she was laid off, and she's requesting a quite big package. She needs that because she has 2 children in school, so she needs to pay for and take through here in Singapore. And she's been outside of the job market for a few months now. And she's had so many job interviews, so many job offers on the table, but they're not being able to be signed during this challenging period. So she still finds herself in between jobs, and she's worried that she has to take the children out of school. So you can imagine that she is suffering. Then we have Gary, not his real name, but a real case. He had, just before COVID-19, over the last 10 years, built up a catering company, one of the biggest in Singapore. He built up this empire around him, and he basically was living the dream. His wife was very much against this. She said, why don't you just get a standard normal job? You're working too much around the clock. But he was chasing the dream and really building up some great business. His business have in the last few months collapsed. He's basically now lost everything. His company about to become bankrupt. His wife is saying, well, I told you so. And she's about talking about divorcing him. He's really suffering at the moment, and he doesn't know who should he talk to about this. The job market is very tough. So you can imagine what's going through in his life. And then we have Pascal. Pascal's ex-wife divorced him because he was working too much. He was traveling too much. And end of last year, he found another job where they promised him that you don't have to travel so much. And he's now in Singapore, indeed, cannot even travel now due to the restrictions. But his new company is doing so bad during this time that because he was just recently hired, he's on the line to perhaps lose his job. So now with a new wife and being in a job he wanted, he might find himself outside of a job again. So his anxiety is increasing. He also have children to take through university at the moment. So it's that is a lot of the case studies out there like this, real life scenarios. And for every time one of the articles shows up here where some of the people are sharing the views, so when I'm sharing on you today, people are coming to me afterwards and said, Nick, I also have a story to share for your book, or I have my wife or my sister is also suffering. So this is much bigger than what we can even imagine. But it's important that just like today, we're getting together, we are being honest, we are talking about it. And if you feel something inside you already today that it is you want to talk about, make sure that you take some action today. There's your chance to change your life, to turn around your life. So here I just thought we should just take a quick breath, and also if there's some question, you can feel free to post it in the box, or unmute yourself and ask a question. And also there's the QR code to my LinkedIn page. Feel free to scan it if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. And yeah, you can send me a request or send me a question. Feel free to connect with me afterwards if you like. I'm not a specialist in this topic by any means. I'm not a medical professional, but I know who to point to. And even in the articles that we had published, it's always the different helplines and so on there. And it might be just that you need to speak to someone if you're suffering, or maybe one in your family need to speak to someone. And I believe that at least I can help you to point you in the right direction. So if there's no questions, we take them later. I just wanted to continue, and let's go into a topic that is very, very sensitive, but it's important to talk about. People are highly reluctant to talk about mental health, and especially suicide. It's such a taboo topic. Even in Singapore, until December 31 last year, it was illegal with suicide attempts. So that means that if you are in a family and one of your family members want to commit suicide or have an attempt to commit suicide, they fail and they survive, and you want to get help, people will be terrified to seek that help because they will be worried, if I go and see a doctor of this, if I go see a specialist, maybe they report this to the police and you be charged with it. So I'm so pleased that they now changed this. So from January 1 this year, it's decriminalized with suicide attempts, and with that, we can now start talking about it like we do today. And we have to come to the point where it's okay to talk about suicide. It's a very, very long journey from that having just been decriminalized 7 months ago. But I'm here to help to drive this, because if someone is sitting inside and they start having those thoughts about suicide, but it's illegal for them to even talk about it, then it can only go down one way. You can imagine how many lives are saved by just changing this law to making it legal to seek help for it. So on that note, I wanted to ask that do the next poll, and it's anonymous, so you can answer here. I will launch the poll. Do you know someone who committed suicide? And it's a yes or a no. And if you don't feel comfortable answering it, feel free to ignore it. That's also fine. Thank you. Let me launch the result. So we have 36% says yes. Okay, that's pretty aligned with the global average. Around 30% is the global average, they say. I gave this keynote in Myanmar in January this year, just before the COVID-19 travel restrictions. And it was senior government officials and so on. I was invited by the vice minister's wife to come there to give this keynote. And I asked this question, and in the room there was only 2-3 people at the back who raised their hand. All the others was not. Then I did this keynote again to the same audience online in April, and I had this poll anonymously, and it showed that 60% knew someone who committed suicide. So that just shows, like in a country like Myanmar, where they're scared about even speaking up. So when it was in person, no one even dared to raise their hand to even just say that they know someone who committed suicide. So that's the kind of topic that we're dealing with, where people are so scared even to think about it, to talk about it, or that people should know that they know. So that's the stigma that we need to reduce, how difficult it even is. And it's challenging for me to talk about this topic after what happened to Simon. But it is just for the sake of us having a better future. So what about now during the COVID times? Of course, we have seen already that suicides are spiking. People cannot cope with the pressure. The isolation was hard on many people that were suffering already before it was taken to the next level. If they were suffering mentally, perhaps because the business was bad or the relationship was bad, it had turned to the worst by now. So it's important that we are aware that it is a lot of people out there suffering, and it's important to always be kind to people, be kind to strangers, because you just never know who you are talking with, what is going on inside their head. Certainly when I was suffering, no one could really see it. Many of the members who are still with EGN today, 100 of them, no one had at least any idea. They said there was no one who could know. I tried my best to hide it, and I played around it, and I tried to put on a forced smile during those months. So it's very, very hard to know. The fact is that we have a mental health epidemic. It's spots all over the world, hotspots where suicide is really spiking. Just last year by itself, the NYPD had 10 suicides in the police force. We know that Australia is a hotspot. In fact, I'm giving my keynote tonight to Australia. There's a volunteer organization there called Mentoring Men, which is a network only for men, where they can call each other, and they have helplines, and they can talk to try to avoid that it goes as mental health as bad to a suicide. So we keep having this dialogue because we are in an epidemic, and it's just a matter of time before otherwise it would turn into a global pandemic with suicides, and that's what we don't want. So let's then look at men versus women. So who are experiencing more loneliness? So let me launch this polling to see what you believe on men versus women. A lot of voting for the men there. Okay, let me end the polling and share the result. So 64% believe men and 7% women, 21% the same, and 7% not sure. Well, I have been reading on this topic and trying to research it, and it's a very tricky topic, and most people have different opinions. You see, it's tricky to get the numbers for a few reasons. Because if the men are not feeling well, they don't go and seek help. Men try to not open up at all. But women, on the other hand, they tend to have 2 or 3 at least close friends. Some people who they trust, who they have close to them. So if they're not feeling well, they're likely to tell someone that they're not feeling well. And that friend is likely to say, well, why don't you just go and see a doctor, or I come with you to the doctor. And then you go to the doctor, and the doctor will, of course, give some medicine or give some advice. And therefore, it's documented. So what we do see is that there's actually more women than men that are seeking help for mental health related issue or for loneliness. That is what we see, and that goes across the most countries. But that might just mean that the men are just not seeking the help. If we are then looking at suicides, we also know that there's more suicide attempts by women globally. That could also be for a similar reason, because if it's a suicide attempt and you fail, maybe the man will feel shy to even admit it and again try to hide it. But if it's a woman, then most likely the case is brought to surface and dealt with. But what we do know then also is that there's actually more men that are succeeding in completing the suicide. That is seen in the statistics, and that may be that they're using heavier methods like guns and so on, and they are more committed to succeed with it. So it's a challenging topic, but it's something that is worth discussing about. The last topic that I wanted to bring on the agenda for today is about digital transformation. So think for yourself, what do you think? Especially now when we've been in the lockdown modes, the digital transformation have done wonderful things. It might have been the only way to connect with each other, Zoom, like we are connecting today. So there's obviously positives to it, but there's also a lot of negatives to it. If we're looking over the last 10 years, how communication have changed from person to person, when you go up to someone to speak and you just send a message which might be misunderstood. And all of those instant messaging and communication and faster responses certainly leads to miscommunication, more arguments, and that we start blocking people we don't like because maybe it was just a misunderstanding. So according to me and according to the research, we do feel more isolated the more we use digital tools, but we have to use them in an engaging and a productive way. And it's up to us to make sure we do that, and also to look out for our family members so that they don't isolate behind the devices, but they use it in a good manner. So that brings me to how to then overcome executive loneliness. And before I throw this to the floor and hear from you with your tips and in how you can overcome it, and I'm sure you all learned some fantastic tools how to connect now during the COVID-19 times, how to get closer to each other. But let me just share with you how I managed to turn around from lying in bed with a foot swollen like a balloon, where I could hardly walk for 500 meters, into completing Ironman Sweden in August last year. So that's a 3.8 kilometer swim, 180 kilometer cycle ride, and then you run a marathon after. So how can I turn around my life like that in just 1 year? Well, I did it by speaking up. I did it by opening up my mouth. I met a new wife and I told her what was going on. That was the first person for many years that she started to be honest with. But it was because also I started to be honest with myself. I said, because I'm going to die if I don't do something. I was so scared that was the point I was. I basically had given up. I had surrendered. And that's why I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to die or I have to speak up. So I told my wife, and then we started to look at, and I started to write down on the papers everything that was wrong with me. And I started to see doctors. I started to see psychologists. I got a fitness coach, nutrition coach. So basically I did massive, big action. I bought the Garmin watches where you can track your sleep, the weight. I bought a new scale, and so I basically set up all the support I needed to track it and to get well. And it was amazing how quickly I managed to break it. It started by walking 2 kilometers per day for a week, and then up to 3 kilometers. And within just a few months, I started to jog, cycle. I got a swim coach so I could swim. So I shifted also all my bad habits of going to the bar after work, turned into good habits. And then having someone accountable, so a fitness coach that looked after it. So the devices are so great these days that you can track everything and you can see that you are following the right path. So that all of those things work really well. Because also I had the drinking problem, I had to admit that. And I went to AA, which is an organization for people that with drinking problems. And I found great support in that organization. And that's a volunteer organization, basically. So you might think then when I'm saying the actions I took that it cost a lot of money. It doesn't actually. That's probably an excuse that people might have. I didn't spend much money. I just needed to see a therapist 2 times about this and a few times here and there, and then get a coach to do a 6-month plan, which is monitored by devices. So, and I had the ultimate goal of doing this race. I signed up for the race 1 year and ahead, so I had 1 year to train for it. And the feeling to just come back was unbelievable. And just starting to talk to other people, finding myself. Today, when I'm surrounded by people, I feel a connection, and I feel very healthy and much greater. And I just need to share my story because of that, because what happened to Simon, that he had to go, he didn't have someone, obviously, that he just opened up to. He perhaps kept it inside him. And it's sad, anytime I read about suicide, the first thing I'm thinking now is, why didn't that person just speak to 1 or 2 people about this, and the life would have been saved? Because that's all it is. But for us out there, we need to look out for these people and try to be vulnerable yourself. Because if you are vulnerable yourself with your family, friends, colleagues, and you open up, even with small steps when you're not well, tell them honestly what's happening, then you will be surprised that they would maybe the next day come to you and share what's going on in their lives. So you're creating this positive new habit of being honest and vulnerable. So what happened then now during COVID-19 with me? Well, I have to say I went through some challenging times like everyone else. Especially here's a photo of my son in Sweden a few months ago. He's now 11 years old. He lives with my ex-wife in Sweden, and he was booked to come to Singapore over Easter to visit me. Of course, with the travel restrictions and so on, that never happened. And I became very resentful. I started to become angry inside me. I was angry at the laws and regulations. Why can he not travel here? And I said it should be okay. And in the end, it couldn't happen. And on top of that, we had a travel agency where we booked hotel, flights, and we booked the travel insurance for this. Everything went bankrupt. We also lost the money for the flight and everything else, and the hotel, all expenses. So I was in a bad place, and I couldn't get over this, and I didn't really know what to do. Should I fly to Sweden, but then I cannot come back to Singapore for my job and my wife here and everything else. So this was going on in my head, and I started to read a lot of news, watching the news, and of course following the COVID numbers, and I fell really, really bad back into some bad patterns. Luckily, I didn't go back to drinking alcohol or going that deep. I managed instead to really take a breath and think, okay, Nick, take a pause here now. What's going on? So what I did, even though I wasn't drinking, I came back to the AA groups and just shared my challenges. I started to open up. I said, this is what's happening. And they started to give me some advice. I then also made an appointment with a family therapist. And this family therapist said, find out what your son loves to do. And it wasn't actually what I thought. He loves to play online games. So now actually I bought the online game. We play multiplayer games together. So on Saturdays for 2 hours, I log on here in Minecraft from Singapore. I sent him a headset and a webcam, so we see each other in the game. And he has built a house for me inside the game. He plays during the weeks, and he collects things. He put in a box for me. And on the weekend when we play, he shows me what he's created during the week. So I'm coming into his digital world, which an 11-year-old is perfectly fine with. It's only my mind, my traditional old mind, that would be that we need to be in the same place, we need to go cycling, swimming, and do these things. But that's not exactly what he wanted. But I needed someone else to help me to see that, because I was too much in a negative spin. So that's how I managed to turn it around. And I'm so pleased that I now have this mindset: when things are not going well, seek help, speak up, and move on. So that was my story. Thank you so much for listening. I now want to really open up the floor to hear from you, and we can have a Q&A, but basically I put here also, either you can write if you want, you can speak up, but how to overcome executive loneliness, and what are your tips or any questions for me. Thank you. Thank you, Ole. I'm going to see here. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Maybe, Ole, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. That becomes a little bit more interactive. Okay, that seemed not to work. But okay, I guess you can answer the question, or maybe read it out.
Yes, he says, has anybody been caught by this, thinking you were seeing, cared about it, but to realize, as we know, just as greeting? Do we really think about what we answer when we greet each other? That's true, right? You just say, how are you? Yeah, I'm good, thanks. And you're absolutely right, Ole, and that we do that out of courtesy. And even if you ask it deeper, how are you really? Well, maybe that takes it a bit more. But I think, at least in my experience, it's over a coffee, a lunch, or an honest conversation about it. But in my case, it was going into a group where you have the format. As I said, AA helped me with that, because there is a conversation. And if you don't have a drinking problem, then it can be a therapist. Just go to a therapist and speak, and how to learn how to have these honest conversations.
Nick, I have a couple of questions, which is, first of all, being here in Asia, I'm working in an Asian company where all my colleagues are Asian. And not surprisingly, we're running a big project. It's very stressful, and COVID doesn't make it any easier. And I already have a couple in my team who I know, for positive, are suffering from stress, going towards depression. And when I try to talk to them about it, they're kind of open, as long as I don't say anything about therapists, psychologists, like mental health support. Would you have any idea of how to tackle that for Asians specifically? And that goes a little bit to my next question, which is, I also know Europeans who clearly have a problem, but they do admit they have a problem, but they don't want to seek help. What do you do in those situations?
Yeah, the thing, and this is where having some close friends help, because many times people are not open-minded to getting that feedback, or at least hopefully if someone listens today, they will feel that, well, maybe I really need to take that step. I mean, what do you have to lose, really? I mean, someone need to explain that to them. What do you have to lose? If this is how you're feeling, if this is what's going on in your life. Or in my case, my wife came with me to the doctor. She came with me and helped me because I was scared. I was scared that maybe they're going to inpatient me in the hospital, or all these things were going through my head. So even if I told someone I would go and see a doctor, I might have lied. Maybe I didn't go there, made an appointment and cancel it. So I think it's important to hold the hand of someone and take them, or have someone who, accountability friend almost, which then in my case, AA, the group there, became the program at AA is that you get a sponsor who support you, right? Someone who been there before, who sorted it out to help you. And so the sponsor in life can be a wife or a colleague or someone, or a boss can help an executive, or the HR in a company can help an executive also, right? Did that answer your question, Pernilla?
Yeah, somewhat. I don't think you really cover the Asian aspect, because I think now when you say what do you have to lose, well, you have your face to lose, and that's, I think, one of the really big challenges, at least for Scandinavians, because I mean, I wouldn't say we couldn't care less, but it's a very different way of thinking, and as you also talked about in the beginning, that whole stigma around mental health and therapists and so on. I think that's quite tricky out here.
Yeah, it's much trickier for Asians and Singaporeans. It's more stigma around it. It's a bigger job to do. Just to give you an idea, in the AA meetings, 90% are Westerners, because the Asians are very scared to be seen there in that environment and so on. So yeah, they're holding on to it even more. And I mean, it's the same process and same dialogues, but it needs to be done more. Organizations like the Samaritans, SOS, the hotline there, the suicide hotline, it just need to be spread. The phone number need to be shared, as in an event today, so that people have it handy and call. It's much more serious for Asians, yes. I see a question from Vicky. Have you become more religious? Does it help? And that's a great question, Vicky. Yes, because it's true. I think in today's society, many of us are moving quite far away from God, and I had forgotten myself all about what this was. But when I came into the AA program, that is not a religious program, but it certainly believed you need to somehow believe that there's something greater than yourself out there. And once you start to believe that you're not the biggest in the world, there's other things around you. Once you humble, which AA program does for you, it certainly helps. So if you have a religious foundation, it will help a lot. Just for the sanity, right? Anyone else have any question? As we talk also, I will just put up my screen here. So if you feel that you don't want to ask questions now, feel free to scan my QR code. You can send me a private LinkedIn message after this if you want, and connect with me.
Another quick question. Your foot, I know another one who has a similar foot. What actually made that go away? So you said you started out walking 2 kilometers, but looking at the foot, it seems like that must have been a bit of a struggle. So what happened there, and how long time did it take for it to disappear?
So I stopped alcohol on May 5, 2018, and I haven't been drinking since. So that was one thing. And my nutritionist helped me with a diet. I really changed my complete diet, drinking more water, and even having like matcha powder and water, all these kind of things to detox and cleanse me. So it went quite fast. In 2-3 weeks, the swollen foot was gone, and I've never seen anything of it again. And I think just the fact that we see that swelling going down every day motivated me, right? Because I was wondering what is going on, and I spent so much money and time to see doctors and x-rays, and I couldn't figure out for many months what was wrong. So that certainly was also a mental switch, seeing, oh, I'm coming back to life here. Anyone else have a question? I know it's a tricky question. No, okay.
I do. Thanks for sharing your story, Nick. It's very powerful stuff, I think. One of the things that I've been thinking about while listening to you is obviously in your case it was pretty evident for you that something wrong was happening. Your foot was huge. You were putting on weight. Things were going on in your life where you could feel very tangible sort of issues with yourself, but identifying the entire problem or that something is going on with you, isn't that sometimes also a really big challenge in the process? Because I can easily identify with some of the things you're saying, but at the same time I also feel like, okay, but I'm in control of my life, but what goes on there, you think? Do you understand where I'm getting at?
Yes, I do. And I think what I mentioned, what happened now during COVID-19 for me, when I started to get that panic again and worries about that I cannot see my son, I think that's an example. That was going through my life. Normally, before having gone through this journey, I wouldn't have taken any action. I would just have lived with that. Probably still today, I would be looking every day, when can I fly to Sweden to see him? And I would be angry. I would live with that. So the difference now is that as soon as I identify these feelings, I'm thinking, who can have the answer for this? It doesn't always have to be a therapist. It can be just having an honest chat with a friend, or a cycle ride on a morning. I cycled with a few friends yesterday and we were talking about some other challenges. And so I think the best for us men, at least, is try to speak about it. How are you really feeling inside? Not just how are you doing, but when you have some mates, you do some sport, or if it's going out for a few drinks, just release the pressure by saying how are you feeling. And I think then the honest conversation will start from there, and you will feel great afterwards, and your friends will see that you will build a stronger relationship and more honest. I try to have more deeper conversations with everybody. Just every time you're going to see your friend, think before, is it something on your mind that you can share? And you'll be surprised. They won't be bothered. They'll be pleased and honored that you trust them to share this with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's one more. Otherwise, thank you very much, Nick. Indeed, a very powerful story. Fantastic to see that you're here and in a completely different shape. Thanks a lot for sharing all this. I think we have all got quite some food for thoughts. And I think that people will remember your name and connect maybe in a different setting. As you say, it's not always easy to bring out the real questions in this kind of setting. But thanks a lot for that offer. Thanks to everybody for showing up this morning. Would like to hear a lot more about what's going on in this topic, but definitely you have made, I think somebody is saying here that it's made a genuine start to a great day. So thanks a lot, and everybody, wish you a fantastic day, where maybe we should start.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Tack Pernille.
Nick.
Super.
Have a good day, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.